with my deconstruction content, it's my desire to offer something that I hope will be clarifying in some way. I'm aiming for clarifying, not polarizing. But what became clear to me in this past election season and through my experience with PCC is that people are living in separate realities, and in one, the one that I'm in, and I know many others are as well, we look at a system like this, and the fruit we see from it is, wow, what a culture of control. They're teaching compliance, but they're not teaching independence, and they're not teaching self-governance, which I believe are critically important things for, the upcoming generation of professionals, the ones who will be ruling the world, or at least supporting big pharma, because they'll be the next generation buying antidepressants. But then you will have others who will applaud the system because of how uncompromising it is, because it gives no leeway. Because it's not standing on the boundary line, but it's a few steps back from ever approaching the boundary line with anything that they would consider morally questionable. So there's a specific population within Christianity that really appreciates how unwavering, how strict a place like PCC is, or at least was. Again, early 2000s, it's 2021 right now. I don't know how much has changed, and I haven't kept up with the institution. There was a moment, as I mentioned in episode 3, the evolution of my spiritual life took me from an independent Baptist church throughout pretty much all of childhood into more of a charismatic space. But partway through college, for me, I had reached the point where I was kind of investigating and dipping my toe in the more charismatic waters. And one day I got a slip in my mailbox at school saying I had to appear at the dean's office. And the thing with the slips calling you up to the dean's office, I always wish they'd have more than one color for this. You'd get a green slip in your box, and you never knew if you were in big trouble or if... I got a handful of dean's office slips in my time at PCC, and I never would know, like, am I supposed to be in trouble for something, or are they just randomly calling on a student to ask their opinion about something? Because generally, if I was called up to the dean's office, it ended up that I wasn't even in trouble for anything. I can't even bring examples to mind now. I just remember that I would always be a little nervous because you never know. A place like PCC, even if it was not something you did, you could even be in trouble, like guilty by association, for something someone you knew did that you didn't tell on them for. And so anyways, I didn't know what this was about. And I showed up when I was supposed to show up. And it turned out, putting two and two together, it turned out my pastor at the church that I had grown up in had caught wind of the fact that I was now open to charismatic doctrines, which PCC was definitely not a place for charismatic doctrines. And so he had made them aware, that my theological views were changing. And I got called into the dean's office, not so that I could be given demerits, but so that I could be told, we're aware that your views have changed on the matter of the Holy Spirit, and it's fine for you to still be here, but don't share those views on campus. So, remember a few minutes ago when I said that my first year at PCC, I justified the fact that they had so many rules by telling myself, well, they decide how it is for students who decide to be here. It's cheaper to go here than it is to go to most other schools, so that's a draw, but ultimately it's still my choice whether to be a student here or not, and I don't have to be if I decide not to be. So there was a part of me that still thought, all right, at least through that lens, this is fair. That's the constraint that they're putting on me as one who's decided to continue to be a PCC student. But I'm sure that you can tell this started to get to be a very turbulent thing for me. And with the passing of time, and especially now looking back on those years, there is a shame that I bet some of you can relate to. And I imagine it's not that much different from what it would be like to have your fight or flight kick in at a really inopportune time. And imagine you were there when a young sibling got attacked or molested, and you panicked, and because you panicked, you froze instead of doing anything to stop it. So you were there and you watched it happen, and then you have to live with yourself knowing that you kind of just let it happen. And maybe on some level, yes, you froze, and it was a biological fear response, and if you rationalize it, it's not something to blame yourself for. But you know that it still happened. And you know that you will always carry the memory of witnessing it and doing nothing. I was there for 6 years, and I let myself just be controlled by that system. Yes, I could have just withdrawn. I could have gone somewhere else, but that is not the way that it went. I grew up kind of passivity was what was modeled for me growing up. Good Christian boys do the right thing, and they play nice. You're rewarded for being a nice boy, or at least you're not punished for it. So to come to a point, once enough of this life experience had added up for me to notice patterns, I started recognizing very deeply troubling and even alarming problems in the conservative church. Because of course we've always been taught that it's all about love and that it's all about Jesus. I don't see a lot of Jesus in a lot of what calls itself the church. One of the best examples of which being just how much Christian support there was for Donald Trump. Who, I mean, that's like if you were being funny, you might pick him as a face to put on kingdom values. But then to see that actually play out and all that was just overlooked. Not because of media spin, but because it was there, out in the open. And apparently this was still what Christians wanted. I'm not going to spiral into a political conversation, but it's just to say what I ended up seeing as themes came forward, and I realized I can't be part of this. I saw shame, a culture of control, and fear of punishment. Let me flesh that out just a bit and then we'll wrap it up. Shame because conformity was such a high virtue. It really was like a cult, wasn't it? You will always be accepted as long as you conform. That's really sad. And I think I want to hold myself back from giving much commentary on this right now, but I will mention how that did a lot to stunt my, well, growth in general, but stunt my curiosity, my sense of wonder when God becomes this list of things to memorize, these systematized doctrines, then there's a lot to memorize, but I found that there was not a lot of room for real curiosity. Certainly there were some things because, well, I guess even that was pretty much off the beaten path. Because the things that I was curious about were often not things I would necessarily talk to church leaders about, because it would get pretty apocryphal pretty quick. You know, like if you're looking in the Genesis 6 passage about the giants and things like that, and where they came from, you know. You know, it seemed like everything was already static, it was already fixed in place, and kind of like there were no new things to find. And if you're being told that you're on the straight and narrow path, that's the only path to the God of the universe, should have been a lot more life-giving, a lot more vitalizing, and a lot more curiosity-inducing than it was. Because the God of the universe should have been literally the most interesting thing possible. The culture of control that I mentioned, this takes energy from me to even talk about this. I hope you can tell. Because I am aware that people have such a very different way of processing what they're observing here. And the thing is, on one hand, I get that there are parents who want to spare their children from some heartache and from perhaps some very costly mistakes that they themselves made in younger years. Problem is, you can't inherit maturity, and you can't skip stages of human development. And sometimes you have to get your hands messy to figure out how to be, how to manage yourself, how to show up in the world. Sometimes you have to be allowed to make mistakes so that you can learn why that's not a good way to live. And the biggest thing, and maybe this ought to be its own episode as well, but I may as well mention it. The biggest thing, I think this is the biggest thing. Who cares what the biggest thing is? This is a big thing. When you know that you're not welcome to have dissenting opinions about something that is considered a fixed doctrine, then if you ever do start having those honest opinions, guess what's off limits for conversation? You end up having family get-togethers where it's just a dead conversation and you end up talking about the weather. Because you know there's something that somebody's not saying. And you know there's a reason. But often enough, the reason hasn't made itself plain. So that's the cost of this. And maybe I'll follow up with some details about the theory of conjoint family therapy. Again, I don't want to dive deep into too much more within this episode. But I think that would help shed some light on the dynamics of how systemically people resist change. But we're human. We adapt, we grow, and that's natural. It's normal. And in fact, it's problematic if you stay the same. And that could sound like a radical view depending on who you are listening to this, but let me say it this way. There are so many different denominations that hold on to the Bible as their sacred texts for what they believe. So many denominations because there are so many interpretations of what the text means. Same is true among the Jewish rabbis. If you were a disciple of a specific rabbi, you were under that rabbi's, I guess you'd say, covering, adopting that specific rabbi's interpretation of the Torah. There apparently is a lot of room for interpretation. And when over the course of time true believers have found that they were, let's say, looking at the map wrong, they've adjusted for that. I'm sure, regardless of where you're at with whatever you believe right now, I imagine that you can appreciate the fact that 500 years ago, the Protestant Reformation took place because someone saw problems. And they took a stand, and they made a change. And can you imagine how uncomfortable that must have been? And yet how resolute Martin Luther was, and others who followed, when they saw the need. The Baptist denomination wouldn't exist now if that hadn't happened then. So, like it or not, this is a process of evolution. And I think I'd be met with a lot of resistance if I simply asked, what if you're wrong? Big reason being, it would be taken as an affront to God. Because it seems, at least in the system that I was brought up in, that's what everything turned out to be. An offense to God. I know that I haven't spoken with a lot of emotion throughout this video. Maybe you've seen a little bit of it in my eyes and a tiny bit in my voice, but yeah, a lot of that's been suppressed for a very long time, and I'm not sure when that's going to find its way to the surface. I know that doing this is important for me in my own process. But I would like to find my voice again. I would like to stop feeling paralyzed when I'm in the presence of people who are speaking about their views that are no longer my views, that maybe they think are still my views. I'm still trying to decide what my boundary even needs to be with that. Sometimes I just let it go because I don't think there's any openness to consider other perspectives. So I would just rather not engage than to just get myself upset about it. It's a lot to process, and I don't want to talk to anybody who's going to make it all a moral issue and who's going to look at it and just say, oh, Jeremy, I'll pray for you that you'll find your way back to God. First and foremost, what I'm talking about this time is, in this episode, is being crushed to the point of complacency and to the point of not believing you're allowed to have a voice. Because even if I'm only now finding words to say that, that's what it was, that's what happened. I was bred to not have a voice, unless it was one of many voices in the echo chamber. I guess that's enough for now, yeah, so let's talk soon.